Get out!
Revenge Files with Nora. File 15. Jennifer. You're reducing my compensation to $42,000. I said it calmly, but every syllable landed like a grenade in that glass-walled conference room on the 31st floor. Kenneth Marston didn't blink. He just sat there with his reading glasses perched on his nose, fingers drumming against a folder that contained the wreckage of my career. 42,000. Down from 114,000. That wasn't a pay cut. That was corporate execution dressed up in HR language. I'd seen that look before on men who confused authority with intelligence. My name is Jennifer Sterling. I'm 34 years old, and I live in a converted loft in Tribeca with exposed brick walls and a view of the Hudson that cost me everything I had in savings. For 9 years, I've been a principal data engineer at Catalyst Analytics Partners, a mid-sized consulting firm that builds predictive models for Fortune 500 companies. I'm also the reason their revenue tripled in the last 4 years. 9 years of late nights, missed weekends, and algorithms that made other people rich. Let me take you to the day that changed everything. The document sat between us like evidence at a crime scene. Departmental realignment, the header announced, with my name typed beneath it in neat Arial font. Kenneth cleared his throat, his voice smooth as polished marble. It's affecting multiple teams, Jennifer. We're all making sacrifices. Sacrifices. Right. That explained why 3 senior analysts had received retention bonuses last month while my project budget got slashed without explanation. That explained why my security clearance to the analytics servers had been mysteriously downgraded. That explained the whispered conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room. I didn't touch the paper. Just let it sit there, radiating its quiet devastation. I was angry. I always do my job professionally and calmly, but I must admit, I'm not very good at staying calm when it comes to matters outside my expertise, especially when there's a great injustice at stake. Then, some woman from finance whose name escaped me leaned forward. The board has mandated cost reductions across all technical divisions. Your role has been reclassified to align with current market rates. Translation, we've decided you're expendable, and we're hoping you'll quit before we have to fire you. Trying to stay calm, I said, let me consider my options, and pushed back from the table. No one had heard me grinding my teeth at that moment. Kenneth raised his eyebrows as if I'd suggested we settle this with a fistfight, which at that moment seemed tempting. Jennifer, this is a standard restructuring decision. The parameters aren't flexible. The parameters. Like I was a variable in one of my own algorithms, something to be optimized, minimized, eliminated. I stood and gathered my jacket from the back of the chair. I'll need a few days to review the terms. Where are you going? His voice carried an edge now. We were hoping to finalize this today. I paused at the door and looked back at him, this division head who'd spent 9 years taking credit for my innovations while barely understanding what I actually did. I'm going to decide whether I want to work for a third of my value or find somewhere that recognizes what I bring. That was a lie. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I'd been preparing for this moment for 8 months. The warning signs had been impossible to miss. Strategy meetings I wasn't invited to. Presentations where my work appeared under someone else's name. Equipment requests that sat in approval limbo for weeks. My research assistants reassigned to other projects without consultation. But the real confirmation came 6 weeks ago, when I discovered that Kenneth and the chief technology officer, Bradley Whitmore, had been conducting private demonstrations of my predictive analytics framework to potential clients' demonstrations that conveniently omitted any mention of who had actually built the system. They were planning to push me out and keep my work. That was their first mistake. I took the elevator down to the lobby and walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop I'd never visited during work hours. The autumn air was sharp against my face, carrying that particular New York smell of exhaust and possibility. Yellow cabs honked in the distance. A subway grate released a warm gust of underground air. Classic New York. While trying to calm down, I deeply felt how much I loved this city. I found a corner table, ordered a cappuccino I didn't intend to drink, and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. That surprised me. The call connected on the second ring. "Monica, it's Jennifer Sterling. I think it's time." Monica Salazar was a patent attorney who specialized in intellectual property disputes. We'd met at a conference 2 years ago, and I'd kept her card because something told me I'd need it eventually. She had a reputation for being surgically precise when it came to protecting her clients' technical innovations. In this business, precision is everything. She understood that better than anyone. "What happened?" she asked. "They offered me 63% less than my current salary. Departmental realignment, they called it, but you have everything documented. Every line of code, every algorithm design, every test result. Time-stamped, backed up, and stored on systems they don't know exist. Good. How soon can you meet? How's tomorrow morning?" I hung up and stared out the window at the Manhattan street scene, businesspeople rushing past, tourists with their phones out, delivery workers weaving through traffic on electric bikes. Catalyst Analytics occupied a sleek building about 20 blocks north. From where I sat, it was invisible, swallowed by the city's indifferent geometry. I started doing calculations in my head again. I had to. Wouldn't you protect what's yours? They thought they had me cornered. Thought I'd accept their insulting offer because I needed the steady paycheck. Thought I was just another technical resource who'd built her career on the company's foundation. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The work that changed everything had started 4 years ago, long before Kenneth decided I was disposable. I'd been struggling with a problem that had frustrated data scientists for over 10 years: how to build predictive models that could adapt to changing market conditions without requiring constant manual recalibration. Traditional machine learning approaches needed huge amounts of historical data and regular retraining. That was fine for stable industries, but it was worthless for sectors experiencing rapid change, emerging markets, disruptive technologies, crisis response. By the time you retrained your model, the patterns had already shifted. I'd tried everything the literature suggested: different neural network architectures, ensemble methods, transfer learning approaches. Nothing worked until I stumbled onto something during a weekend debugging session. I'd been experimenting with a technique I called dynamic coefficient weighting, essentially teaching the algorithm to recognize when its own assumptions were becoming outdated and automatically adjust its internal parameters. Most machine learning systems are static between training cycles. Mine was designed to evolve continuously. Maybe this sounds boring to you, but the breakthrough came at 3 in the morning on a Saturday in March. I'd been running simulations on financial data from the previous decade, testing whether my algorithm could predict market movements during periods of extreme volatility. When I saw the results, I actually laughed out loud in my empty apartment. During the last major financial crisis, traditional models had failed catastrophically because they'd been trained on stable market data. My algorithm detected the regime change within 72 hours and adjusted its predictions accordingly. I spent the next 2 months refining the system, testing it against every dataset I could access. The results were consistent. My dynamic coefficient algorithm outperformed every existing predictive model by margins that seemed almost impossible. And I developed it entirely on my own time, on my own equipment, using my own data sources. That night, I sat in my Tribeca loft with a glass of wine, staring at the city lights reflected on the Hudson River. My anger had transformed into something colder, more calculated. They thought they'd force me to quietly resign by cutting my salary, keeping everything I'd built while I ran away with my tail between my legs. They had no idea what they were dealing with. And knowing this was, frankly, satisfying, because they deserved it. I pulled out the notebook I'd been keeping for the past 8 months, a detailed record of every suspicious interaction, every budget cut, every reassigned assistant. Reading through it now, the pattern was obvious. They'd been methodically isolating me, removing my access and influence piece by piece, preparing the ground for exactly the kind of ambush Kenneth had just delivered. Reading it felt like watching a crime unfold in slow motion, except I was both the detective and the victim. But they'd made one critical error. They'd assumed I was naive enough not to notice. They'd assumed I was too invested in my salary to walk away. They'd assumed wrong. I wasn't naive. I was patient. There's a difference. The morning after Kenneth's ambush, I met Monica at her office in the financial district. Her corner suite had windows overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge, and the walls were lined with framed patent certificates. Each one represented someone who'd fought back and won. She had sharp eyes, graying hair in a professional bun, and a handshake that could crack walnuts. "I've been expecting your call," she said as we settled into leather chairs facing her desk. "When you told me about the situation 2 months ago, I knew it was only a matter of time." "Walk me through your documentation," she said after I explained the latest developments. I opened my laptop and showed her the evidence I'd been compiling for years. Timestamped code, commits on my personal GitHub repository. Purchase receipts for the server hardware in my home office, video recordings of key development sessions, lab notebooks with dated entries showing the evolution of my algorithms. Every timestamp was a weapon. Every receipt was ammunition. Monica studied everything with the focused intensity of a surgeon reviewing scans before an operation. "What about your employment contract?" I pulled up the document and highlighted the relevant sections. Standard intellectual property clause, but it specifically defines company property as work created using company resources during business hours on projects assigned by management. "And your algorithm?" "Developed on personal equipment, during personal time, on self-directed research that was never part of my official job responsibilities. My work at Catalyst focused on implementing existing predictive models for clients. This algorithm is something entirely different." She nodded slowly. "They might argue that your expertise was gained through company employment. General data science knowledge isn't proprietary. The specific technique I developed, dynamic coefficient weighting, has no precedent in any Catalyst project or any academic literature. It's a novel approach I invented through independent research." Monica was quiet for a moment, scrolling through my documentation. "How confident are you that none of this work overlaps with anything you did for Catalyst?" "Completely confident. The algorithms I built for clients use standard approaches, gradient boosting, neural networks, time series analysis. My breakthrough uses a fundamentally different mathematical framework. There's zero overlap in the underlying code." "Good," she said, "because if we file patents on this, Catalyst will absolutely challenge ownership. We need to be bulletproof." "We are." "Confidence isn't arrogance when you've done the work." To make sure I was protected, that afternoon I submitted 4 provisional patent applications. The core dynamic coefficient algorithm, a specialized variant for financial market prediction, another variant optimized for supply chain analysis, and a 4th application covering the mathematical framework that made all of them possible. Within 24 hours, my intellectual property would be legally protected. The following Monday, I walked into Catalyst Analytics for what I expected to be my final week. I decided to give proper notice not out of loyalty, but because I wanted to watch them realize what they were losing. Kenneth summoned me to his office at 9:15. "Jennifer," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I was hoping we could revisit our conversation from Friday. Perhaps there's room for negotiation on the compensation structure." I sat down but didn't remove my jacket. "What kind of negotiation?" "The board has approved a modified offer. $65,000, with a clear pathway to salary restoration based on performance metrics. $65,000. A 43% cut instead of 63%. How generous." "I appreciate the flexibility," I said, "but I have a counterproposal." His eyes narrowed. "What kind of counterproposal?" I pulled out a manila folder and placed it on his desk. "Licensing agreements for proprietary technology I developed independently. Predictive algorithms that outperform anything currently on the market." I watched his face carefully. This was the moment I'd imagined for months. Kenneth opened the folder and began reading. His face went through several interesting color changes as he processed what he was seeing. You can't. This technology was developed while you were employed here." "Actually, no. Every line of code was written on my personal equipment during personal time. All development occurred outside business hours using resources I purchased myself. I have complete documentation." He looked up, his expression caught between anger and disbelief. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Exclusive licensing rights for my predictive analytics framework. $200,000 per month for the complete suite of algorithms." That's 2.4 million annually. The number hung in the air between us like a verdict. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes. Don't you think it's satisfying to watch that silence when you give someone a surprise like that? I let him sit with it. Some lessons need time to sink in. That's insane. Kenneth finally said, "We can't authorize that kind of expenditure without board approval. Then get board approval. It doesn't work like that. We'd need to verify the technology, run independent tests, assess the market potential." I stood and gathered the folder. The verification happens after you sign the licensing agreement, not before. If you want to run tests, you can purchase evaluation licenses at standard market rates. Wait, his voice had an edge of desperation now. What about your position here? Your salary adjustment? I looked at him with what I hoped was perfect neutrality. As of today, I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice. My last day will be a Friday in November. You can't just quit. Bradley doesn't get a vote in my career decisions. And as for my responsibilities here, you just told me my work was worth $42,000 a year. I'm sure you can find someone at that salary level to handle whatever I leave behind. I walked toward the door, then paused. One more thing. I've already had preliminary conversations with Vertex Data Solutions. They're very interested in my background in adaptive predictive systems. Kenneth's face went pale. Vertex was Catalyst's most aggressive competitor. Your non-compete clause doesn't apply to independent consulting arrangements, I said. I won't be working as their employee. I'll be licensing proprietary technology I developed on my own. Different legal framework entirely. I left him sitting there, staring at the folder I'd handed him like it might spontaneously combust. The look on his face was worth every late night I'd spent preparing for this moment. The next 2 weeks were the most satisfying of my professional life. My 8 months of planning were paying off, and fast. I documented every system I'd built for Catalyst, created handover materials for my successor, and watched the quiet panic spread through the executive floor like a slow-moving infection. Meanwhile, I reached out to every major player in the predictive analytics industry. Vertex Data Solutions was the obvious first choice. They had the resources to license my technology and the client relationships to deploy it quickly. But they weren't the only option. 3 companies expressed immediate interest: Vertex, Quantum Analytics Corp., and Prescient Systems International. I scheduled demonstrations with all of them, setting up what I hoped would become a competitive bidding situation. The Vertex meeting happened on a Wednesday afternoon in their downtown Manhattan headquarters. Their head of research, a sharp-featured woman named Dr. Ingrid Holmberg, met me in a conference room that smelled like expensive coffee and ambition. "Before we begin," I said, placing my laptop on the table, "everything you're about to see is proprietary and patent protected. I'll need ND as from everyone present." They signed without hesitation. That told me everything about how seriously they were taking this meeting. The demonstration lasted nearly 3 hours. I showed them how my dynamic coefficient algorithm detected market regime changes in real time, how it automatically recalibrated its predictions without manual intervention, how it had outperformed every major predictive model during historical crisis periods. I walked them through case studies, stress tests, and performance metrics that left no room for doubt about what this technology could do. For the first time in months, I felt something close to joy. By the time I finished, Dr. Holmberg was leaning forward with the focused intensity of someone who'd just seen something impossible. "This shouldn't work," she said, studying the simulation results. "Adaptive recalibration at this speed would require computational resources that don't exist in real-time systems." Traditional approaches would, I agreed. My algorithm uses a different mathematical framework that reduces the computational load by approximately 80% while improving accuracy. "How?" I smiled. "That's the proprietary part." She nodded slowly. "What are you looking for? Employment? Partnership? Licensing? Non-exclusive rights to manufacture and deploy these algorithms under my patents. I retain ownership of the underlying technology and collect royalties on all implementations." "What kind of royalties?" 18% of gross revenue from any product or service that incorporates my algorithms. She didn't flinch, which told me everything I needed to know about how valuable she thought the technology was. "We'd need to verify performance at scale," she said. run our own testing protocols. Of course. That's included in the evaluation license. Similar conversations happened with quantum analytics and prescient systems over the following week. All three companies wanted exclusive deals. All three were willing to pay premium rates. None of them knew they were competing against each other. I was building a bidding war, and Catalyst Analytics wasn't even invited. Competition drives value. That's Economics 101. My final day at Catalyst arrived on a gray November Friday. Perhaps because I had prepared myself for this idea over months and planned the transition, there was no sadness or sense of loss inside me. On the contrary, the new possibilities ahead excited me. I couldn't wait to leave the building. I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to the colleagues who weren't avoiding me, and took the elevator down for the last time. As I walked through the lobby, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We should talk. This is Bradley Whitmore." I deleted it without responding. The following Monday brought an interesting development. Monica called with news that made me pause my morning coffee. "Catalyst filed a lawsuit yesterday," she said. "Theft of intellectual property and breach of employment contract. They're claiming ownership of your patents." I set down my cup. "Do they have a case?" "Not based on your documentation, but they are requesting an emergency injunction to prevent you from licensing the technology while the case is pending." How long would that take? Could be months. They're clearly trying to buy time while they figure out how to replicate your work. Can they replicate it? I thought about the mathematical framework underlying my algorithms, the elegant architecture that had taken me years of independent research to develop. Unlikely. The approach is too novel, and they don't have anyone with the theoretical background to reverse engineer it. Then we fight the injunction and proceed with licensing. What evidence are they presenting? That's the interesting part, Monica said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. They rushed the filing and had to provide evidence upfront. It's pathetic: some emails about general data science topics, a few project reports that don't mention your specific techniques, and testimony from Kenneth Marston claiming, "Your patents must have used company resources because the technology is too sophisticated for someone working alone. Because a woman couldn't possibly have developed breakthrough algorithms without corporate support." Exactly. Gender bias as legal strategy. The judge will love that. The lawsuit was annoying but predictable. What mattered was how my licensing partners would react. I called Dr. Holmberg that afternoon. She'd already heard about the legal challenge and wanted assurances. "Walk me through your documentation again," she said. "Our legal team needs to see everything." I spent 2 hours on a Zoom call, sharing timestamped code commits, purchase receipts, development videos, everything I'd compiled over 4 years of independent work. By the time I finished, she was satisfied. "This is airtight," she said. "Catalyst's case is based on speculation, not evidence. We're proceeding with our licensing agreement." The same conversation happened with quantum analytics and prescient systems. All three companies reaffirmed their commitments despite the lawsuit. 2 weeks later, the judge dismissed Catalyst's complaint. Monica called with the news while I was setting up my new home office with equipment I'd purchased using my first licensing payments. "Motion to dismiss granted," she said. The judge called their case speculative and insufficiently supported. She also noted that their primary witness testimony, Kenneth Marston's, claimed that your work was too sophisticated for independent development, demonstrated gender-based assumptions rather than factual evidence. "Beautiful," I said. "Sometimes justice actually works." What's next? Countersuit for frivolous litigation and tortious interference with business relationships. We're asking for legal fees, damages for delayed licensing revenue, and punitive damages. How much? About $1.4 million. And given Catalyst's current financial situation, collecting might be the easiest part. Financial situation? Monica paused. "You haven't heard. Their stock price has dropped 28% since the lawsuit went public. 3 major clients have terminated contracts, citing concerns about the company's intellectual property practices. The board is reportedly considering a leadership change. Karma isn't always instant, but it's thorough." I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and something almost like regret. Things were moving and changing at a pace I couldn't control. Catalyst employed around 340 people across their New York and Boston offices. Most of them were decent engineers and analysts who didn't deserve to suffer for Kenneth Marston's arrogance. Then I calmly thought and weighed my feelings. I realized I was being unfair to myself. This wasn't my responsibility. I hadn't created this situation. I just refused to let it destroy me. The following month brought developments that exceeded even my optimistic projections. All 3 licensing deals finalized simultaneously, non-exclusive rights at 18% royalties, with Vertex, Quantum, and Prescient all racing to bring products to market first. Conservative estimates put my annual income somewhere north of $14 million once all 3 companies reached full deployment. I used part of the initial payments to lease proper office space in the Flatiron district. In the 3,000 square feet of high-ceilinged workspace, I could continue developing next-generation algorithms. I was developing a lot of ideas in my head. The rest of the payment went into savings, investments, and a donation to a scholarship fund for women in data science. Meanwhile, Catalyst Analytics was imploding. My former colleague Sarah Chen called one evening with updates. She'd been a senior analyst in a different division, someone I'd mentored during her first years at the company. "It's a disaster, Jennifer," she said. "Kenneth got forced out last week. The board brought in some turnaround consultant who's talking about layoffs and potential acquisition." I remembered the faces of people I'd worked with for years. Good people caught in someone else's war. What's the mood like? Terrified. People are updating their resumes, reaching out to contacts. The consulting pipeline has dried up because clients don't trust the company's stability anymore. I'm sorry to hear that. The people there don't deserve this. That's truly how I felt. The bad news from Catalyst was draining my energy and distracting me. I guess this isn't over yet, I thought. Sarah continued, "They're starting to realize what happened," she said quietly. "What Kenneth and Bradley did to you. The story's gotten around. People are angry on your behalf. It's not about anger anymore," I said. "It's about building something better." 2 days later, I received an unexpected email. "Miss Sterling, my name is Martin Gallagher. I've recently been appointed interim CEO of Catalyst Analytics Partners with a mandate to stabilize the company and restore stakeholder confidence. I understand there has been significant conflict between you and previous leadership. I'm writing to explore whether there might be a path toward resolution that benefits all parties. Would you be willing to meet to discuss possibilities?" I studied the message for a long time, turning the words over in my mind. There was no need to reopen a topic I wanted to leave behind. I could delete it just like I'd deleted Kenneth's desperate messages and Bradley's voicemails. But another part of me recognized this was an opportunity, and perhaps I could finally close what I couldn't close in my head. I wrote back suggesting coffee at a neutral location. We met on a Tuesday afternoon at a cafe in Soho, far from both our offices. Gallagher was in his early 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades putting out corporate fires. He had the grace to look uncomfortable as he sat down across from me. He didn't try to shake my hand. "Smart move. Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said. "I know you have no reason to give Catalyst the time of day. I'm curious what you think there is to discuss." He took a breath. "I've reviewed the situation thoroughly. The salary reduction was punitive and unjustified. The patent lawsuit was a desperate attempt to retain intellectual property the company had no legitimate claim to. Kenneth Marston's leadership was characterized by exactly the kind of short-sighted decisions that destroy organizations." I sipped my coffee and waited. "I'll keep it short. I'm here because Catalyst is in serious trouble, and your algorithms represent the most significant innovation in our industry in over 10 years. I'm hoping we can find a way to collaborate that fairly acknowledges your contributions. What are you proposing?" I kept my expression neutral. Years of corporate meetings had taught me that much. "Licensing," he said, "at whatever terms you've offered to other companies. Non-exclusive, full royalties, complete recognition of your intellectual property rights, plus a consulting arrangement where you'd help us implement the technology effectively." I studied him for a moment. This man I'd never met, trying to clean up a mess he hadn't created. "Why should I help Catalyst?" I asked. "After everything they tried to do to me?" "You're right," he admitted. Letting the company collapse and watching your competitors absorb the clients would probably be better for your licensing revenue in the long run. Then why are you asking? Because I'm hoping you're the kind of person who can separate justified anger from unnecessary destruction. Catalyst employs 340 people who had nothing to do with how you were treated talented engineers who deserve better, Miss Sterling. Here I was, facing the issue I couldn't get past again. I appreciated Martin Gallagher's honest approach. As I looked out the window at the Soho Street scene, I thought about the months I'd spent preparing for Catalyst's destruction. My feelings were mixed, but then I thought about Sarah Chen, still working late nights trying to keep projects afloat. About the junior analysts I'd mentored, who were now updating their resumes and panicking about mortgage payments. About the receptionist who'd always remembered how I took my coffee. Revenge would have felt good, but it wouldn't have made me better than them. Besides, I felt I could transform the Catalyst issue from my past into something good instead of running from it. Standard licensing terms, I said finally. 18% royalties, same as everyone else. No special treatment, no discounts, no consulting arrangements. You get access to the technology on the same basis as Vertex and Quantum and Prescient. Business is business. Revenge would have been personal. That's fair, he said, and I want a public acknowledgement, a statement from the company recognizing that the predictive algorithms were developed independently through my own research, with no contribution from Catalyst's resources or intellectual property. He nodded. Done. One more thing, I said. Any employees who were complicit in the effort to steal my work should face consequences. I'm not asking for them to be fired, but I want accountability. Kenneth is already gone. Bradley Whitmore resigned yesterday. The board members who approved the lawsuit have been replaced. Accountability is happening whether you demand it or not. We shook hands across the table. His grip was firm but not aggressive. It wasn't forgiveness, I wasn't sure I had that in me yet, but it was something close to resolution. 6 months later, my algorithms were deployed across 4 major analytics companies, including the rebuilt Catalyst. The licensing revenue had exceeded projections, settling at just over $14 million annually. I'd hired a small research team to help develop next-generation systems. Each of them compensated fairly with equity stakes in the intellectual property they helped create. But the numbers weren't what mattered most. I'd learned something important during those months of preparation. Expertise is only leverage if you protect it. The algorithms in my head were worthless until I documented them, patented them, and established clear legal ownership. The knowledge I'd accumulated over 9 years of professional work meant nothing until I proved it existed independently of any corporate structure. They offered me $42,000 to stay quiet and compliant, to accept my diminished role and be grateful for whatever crumbs they decided to throw my way. I turned that insult into $14 million a year and a revolution in predictive analytics. This isn't revenge. This is just good business. Do you agree? Share your thoughts in the comments. The full blue file playlist's waiting, or discover other color files for more office revenge. See you in the next file.